There are things that are happening right in front of you, right in front of me, that we literally cannot see yet because of our standpoint. Not because we're ignoring them, but because your standpoint has not required you to notice them. Welcome to Badass Softy, a podcast for leaders who are unapologetically ambitious and want to lead with heart because you're allowed to chase big goals without losing what makes you human. I'm your host, Dr. JJ Peterson, and I don't know if you saw in the news recently or maybe on your social feeds, but there was this moment that really struck me. It was a conversation between Sterling K. Brown and Dax Shepard on the Armchair Expert podcast. And they were talking about parenting and social media and how they show up with their kids kind of publicly, like whether they're on there or not. And what struck me specifically wasn't really just like what they said. It was actually how they saw the exact same question from different perspectives. Because they were talking about how Dax and his wife, Kristen Bell, have been very intentional about not showing their kids' faces publicly and on social media. And the whole reason to do this is to protect them and protect their privacy. But Sterling K. Brown shared that he makes a very intentional decision to do the opposite. He actually shows his sons on social media. And his reasoning was that visibility and connection to celebrity actually creates more safety for his sons. If people know who they are and they recognize them, there's a protection that can come with that. And I think it was a bit of a shock to Dax because he hadn't thought about before. And I think it maybe was even a shock to a lot of the people listening because they both had the same goal, protect their kids, but two completely different strategies. And probably like me, if you were listening to that, I didn't think one of them is right and one of them is wrong. I don't think anyone did. We thought, well, of course they see things differently because they're not coming from the same place. They're looking at the question differently through two very different lived experiences. And I think, in my life and even in our lives all the time, this is something we miss. Because we can assume that if two people who are thoughtful, intelligent, and care about the same outcome, that they would land in the same place, in the same approach. And when they don't, people get confused or frustrated, or we start asking questions like, how could they think that? Or what are they missing? Why are they making such a big deal about this? And I don't think anybody did that with Sterling K. Brown. All of a sudden, we had a new understanding of his perspective. So what if instead of asking those questions like, why are they making a big deal about this? Or why are they seeing it differently? What if a better question was, and I'm going to put this very intentionally, where are they standing? What I mean by that is there is a concept in communication theory called standpoint theory that I studied while getting my PhD. And before you tune out, because it sounds, too academic and nerdy, it's actually really simple. Standpoint theory really just means where you stand shapes what you see. Your lived experience shapes what you notice, what feels normal, what feels like a problem, and what feels like no big deal. And here's where it actually gets a little more interesting to me from the theory side. So standpoint theory actually takes this a step further. It says that your perspective isn't just shaped by your experiences kind of in the general sense. It's actually shaped by your position in systems. So things like culture, race, gender, ability, socioeconomic status, even your role within an organization, whether you're a leader of the team or you're at an entry-level position. All of these factors influence how you experience the world and what you're able to see inside of it. So just for a simple example here, if you are in a position where the system generally works in your favor, a lot of that system actually becomes invisible to you. It just feels normal. neutral. This is how things just are. But if you are in a position where the system creates friction for you, you notice things that other people don't. You see the gaps, you see the barriers, the inconsistencies, because you have to. And here's where it even gets a little deeper. One more important idea inside of standpoint theory is this. People in marginalized positions often develop a broader perspective because they have to understand both their own experience and the dominant experience in the world that they have to navigate. So while people in positions of power or majority often don't have to think about it in the same way, they can move through the world without ever needing to consider another standpoint in a deep way. And what I want to be clear about here is this isn't about blame. This isn't about fault. It's about awareness. Because what this means is there are things that are happening right in front of you, right in front of me, that we literally cannot see yet because of our standpoint. Not because we're ignoring them, but because your standpoint has not required you to notice them. And that's why simply saying, well, I can put myself in people's shoes. It's a good instinct, but it's not the same as lived experience. You can imagine what something might feel like, but unless someone helps you see the patterns, the pressures, the repeated moments, you are only getting a partial picture. That's why standpoint matters so much, because it reminds us, if you want to see more clearly, we need more than our own perspective. And here's the good news, though. We're not stuck in our own standpoint. We may not be able to fully live someone else's experience, but we can learn from it. We can ask better questions. We can listen longer. We can invite people to show us what we're missing. We can choose curiosity over certainty. We can choose humility over assumption. And over time, our perspective, our standpoint can expand. Not because we suddenly become someone else, but because we're willing to learn from where they stand. And that's what makes better leaders. Not people who see everything perfectly, but people who are willing to see more today than they did yesterday. And in order to lead someone well, to lead teams well, and fully include everyone in the conversations we're having, we need to understand some things. The things you don't have to think about are often the things you assume are not a big deal. But they may be the very things that are impacting your team, your friends, your family the most. So let me give you a simple example. If I walk into a building, I never have to think about where the ramps are, whether the doors are accessible, how far I have to walk, whether I'm going to be able to navigate the space easily. Accessibility doesn't feel like a big issue to me because I'm in the majority. I am abled, and so I don't have to think about accessibility. I don't wake up thinking about it. I don't go to meetings thinking about it. And more importantly, I don't instinctively design systems thinking about it. But for someone who is physically disabled, that calculation happens constantly and often instantly. Every building, every meeting, every travel plan. If you're around somebody who brings up accessibility again and again and again, from your standpoint, it might feel like, why does this keep coming up? But from another person's standpoint, the answer is because it affects me every single day. Same world, different vantage points. And this shows up everywhere. It shows up in how we lead teams. It shows up in how we build businesses. It shows up in how we tell stories. In my world, the marketing world, it often shows up in how companies tell stories in their marketing. There is a reason why some marketing just doesn't land and creates backlash. I mean, you've probably seen this before. A company launches a campaign, it looks great, it sounds polished, and then part of the audience responds with, this doesn't feel good, it feels off. Not because the company didn't try, but because the people creating the message weren't standing in the same place as the people they were trying to reach. I'm going to give you a very personal example here. There was a Snickers Super Bowl commercial a few years ago, and I don't know if you remember this, but there were two mechanics working on a car, and one of them takes a Snickers out of his pocket, and he puts it in his mouth, and he just kind of starts chewing on it. Well, the other guy sees it, and it looks delicious, so he starts chewing from the other end, and they ended up having this like Lady and a Tramp kind of moment where they were eating towards each other, and they ended up kissing, and all of a sudden when they kissed, they both freaked out and jumped back away from each other. And one of them says, "Quick, do something manly." And the other guy takes off his shirt and he grabs his chest hair and he just rips it off screaming. Now, I remember being with people and everyone was laughing. And I'll be honest, I was even laughing a little bit too. It is funny. However, I had to pause a little bit because anytime there is a commercial where the butt of the joke is about two guys kissing and how unmanly or hilarious that is, that two guys would kiss, it just doesn't sit right with me. Because here's my standpoint. I'm married to a man who I kiss all the time. and that's one piece of it, but there's a whole other world that I have to navigate in that context. See, I've been in situations here in Tennessee where over the phone, someone has agreed to provide a service for me. And then I've shown up with my husband and they've told me they can't help me. No explanation. They just see us together and they have refused service. That still happens. Now, for my straight friends, they go, how does that happen in this day and age? How can you be refused service? I'm telling you, it happens. And that may not be your standpoint, but it is mine. I don't love when my life or kissing my husband becomes a thing that will make people laugh or recoil in disgust. Ultimately, that's not funny for me. And that plays into other areas of my life, like trying to get my car fixed. And people can say, "Oh, you didn't like that commercial. You're just being too sensitive." And you know what? Depending on the day, that may be true. I'll just be honest with you. Some days it's funny. And there are other days where I'm like, I just can't handle this. But what people don't understand is when I look at that commercial and I see something different from you, that is my standpoint. And I doubt most straight people had that same perspective when watching that commercial. They didn't have to. Because when and where they give a little kiss to their partner is not something they have to think about. But it's something I have to think about every single day. Now, taking this outside of my own personal example and how it begins to affect business. So a few years ago, Shea Moisturizer released an ad that was supposed to be about the universal struggle women have with their hair. And on the surface, it looked like they were trying to be inclusive because there was a Black woman in the commercial. But the commercial mostly featured white women with straight hair talking about all of their frustrations with their hair with very little representation of the women who had actually built the brand in the first place. And the response was immediate. Black women who had been their core audience for years felt completely left out of the story, not just missed, but erased. Because the reality is the relationship many Black women have with their hair isn't just about inconvenience or preference. It's tied to identity and history, and in many cases, real experiences of discrimination. And that didn't show up in the ad. I don't know who was in the room when that campaign was made, but I do know this. When the people most affected by the story aren't helping to shape it, you miss things, big things. And to their credit, they owned it and they pulled the ad. But it's such a clear example of what happens when standpoint is missing. Not bad intent, just missing perspective. So this is where the leadership conversation happens, right? Because if you're leading anything, a company, a team, a brand, a movement, if you are a teacher in a classroom, you are constantly making decisions based on what you can see. The question is, what can't you see? Because standpoint theory reminds us of something really important. You can imagine someone else's experience, but you cannot fully understand it unless they help you see it. Again, that's not a failure. That's just human. But great leaders don't stop there. They don't say, well, I don't see it, so it must not be real, or maybe we kind of have to think about this a little bit. No. They get curious. They ask better questions. They invite different perspectives into the room. They ask things like, who's not here that should be here? What might we be missing? What would this look like from someone else's point of view? Because when you have more standpoints in the room, you see more clearly. You avoid blind spots. You make better decisions. And it's not just about avoiding mistake. It's about connection. And honestly, it's about good business. If you want to connect with more people, you have to understand more people. And that doesn't happen by guessing. It happens by listening. Not listening to respond, not listening to defend your position, listening to understand. And for goodness sake, invite more voices into the room. Be intentional about who is there. And even more importantly, when they speak, listen. Because when somebody is talking about an experience that feels foreign to you, oftentimes our instinct is to say, well, I don't see it that way. And you're probably right. You don't. That's the point. But instead of asking, why is this such a big deal? Try asking, what are you seeing that I might be missing? That question will make you a better leader. It will make you a better communicator, a better partner, a better human. And if you're on the other side of that, if you're the one who sees something others don't, there's an invitation for you to help people see, not by overwhelming them, not by assuming bad intent, but by translating your experience into something they can begin to understand. And trust me, I get it. Sometimes explaining to other people what you're going through feels like a burden. And I can sometimes find myself saying, it is not my responsibility to educate you on my pain. Because I want to be seen. I want to just be understood automatically. But the truth is, standpoint theory tells us it won't be seen. It never will unless someone helps us see it. Because we're all just doing the same thing. We're all trying to make sense of this crazy world from where we are standing. And the more we can learn to step toward each other, the more clearly we can see. And I'm so grateful for Sterling K. Brown for bringing that perspective to the table, because that is not a standpoint or perspective that I would see. So I am so grateful for being educated in that space about this conversation. I hope you are as well. So here's my hope for you this week. That you slow down enough just to notice when something just doesn't make sense. Not so you can dismiss it, but so you can get curious about it. That you can ask one more question. That you can listen a little longer. That you consider the possibility that the person in front of you isn't wrong. They're just standing somewhere else. That is what it means to be a great leader. To understand that you show up in the world with a specific standpoint and other people have a different experience that gives them the ability to see things that you might be missing. So before we go, I want to offer you a toast. May you have the courage it takes to see beyond your own perspective. May you have the humility to admit you don't see everything. And to be the kind of leader that makes space for more voices, more stories, and more standpoints. Because we believe you can be both ambitious and kind, fun and driven, powerful and deeply human. Your leadership can inspire, your success can have soul, and your ambition can make space for everyone. That's why you're a badass softie. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. Follow and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. BadassSoftie.com is crafted by Fruitful Design and Strategy.